Number 6 of A Christmas Miscellany 2018 by Various. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Number 6, A Plum Pudding by Sabine Baring Gould. As far as man could suppose, every element that goes to make up happiness was united to bless Mr. and Mrs. Birdwood. He was in easy circumstances, that is to say, he had earned enough money not to be obliged to work any longer, and had his own little house, and could keep a slavey. He was inoffensive in his pursuits, being fond of flowers, especially of roses, which he grafted. And what harm can there be in a man who loves gardening? Next to marrying a curate, a woman has a good certainty of her husband turning out amiable and orderly if he grafts roses. Then again, he was in the prime of life, by no means bad-looking, amiable, and placid. You could not study his face and not see that he was good-natured. On the other hand, Mrs. Birdwood was comely, a lively woman, neat in shape, under 30, and of a florid complexion, which ought to suit a man addicted to flowers. She had made a good match, said her friends, for she was one of 14, and had come penniless to his arms. She had been Eliza Gubbins, and had dropped the Gubbins at the altar. No one could deny that she was the gainer when she acquired a name that carried with it a suggestion of piping and tooting and whistling and jug-jugging and cooing of all kinds of song-birds. But there is a fly in every cup, a thorn to every rose, some bone in every joint you get from the butcher, a cloud in every sky. Mr. Birdwood was of an over-placid and too easy-going nature to satisfy Mrs. Birdwood, who was impulsive, exacting, and sanguine. He accepted connubial felicity as he did his meals, as something anticipated, necessary, and ordinary. Instead of exhibiting an effusion of gratitude to his wife for making him happy, he budded his roses and divided his bulbs and potted his tubers as though that were the main object of his life, instead of falling down and admiring that luminous transcendental being who had condescended to come into Jessamine Villa to be his happiness. They had been married a 12-month, rather more. Eliza Gubbins had supposed that an enamored swain, after marriage, would grow in love like a conflagration, which increases as you add fuel. But it was not so. He was warm and approving, but never rose above blood heat. Moreover, he had a provoking Christian name, Josiah, that he could not alter. Eliza had fed on poetry and romance in her maiden days, and the name Josiah had in it nothing poetical, no romance. "I can't call you Jos," she said, "for that is the short for Joseph or Joshua." "Well, then call me Ziah." "Sire, no, thank you. It would seem as though I regarded you as my sovereign." As yet there was no child, nor prospect of one. This fact might have been considered a reason why they should have been more than ever devoted to one another, as there was no distraction, no one else in the house to love except the slavey, and she was naturally out of the question. But it was not so. Mrs. Birdwood had nothing else to think about except the lack of ardor in Mr. Birdwood, and nothing else to do but fret over it. "My dear," said Josiah Birdwood one day at table, "my dear, I think Maggie Finch is just about your size and build." "Maggie Finch? And who is she?" "I mean the girl at Miss Thomas's, the dressmaker's." "Maggie Finch, indeed!" exclaimed Eliza, turning first red, then white. "And pray, what do you know about that?" witheringly. "Maggie Finch." "Oh, nothing, my dear, only she is in Miss Thomas's shop." "And what do you know of Miss Thomas's shop?" "Why not, my dear? You go to Mr. Gardner's, Mr. Gardner the tailor, I mean." "Oh, of course I do. I have tailor-made dresses." "Then why should not I go to the milliner's to have a milliner-made suit?" "It is preposterous! Maggie Finch, indeed! How do you know she is a Maggie?" "Miss Thomas calls her so." "Besides—" "Well?" sternly eyeing him. "I got her the situation." "Oh, I see. You got her the situation. Yes, her poor father—" "I want to hear nothing of the poor father. It is poor Maggie you think of. I see all, clear as daylight. A finch and a bird would match much better than a gubbin and a bird would." And then she burst into tears. "My dear, be reasonable, and kindly give me a spoonful of gravy. My bacon is dry." "How can you? How can you? Heartless, cruel man! Oh, that I had married a commercial traveller!" "A bagman, my dear? You need not open your mouth, nostrils, and eyes with such a snorting affectation of surprise. I said it, a commercial traveller." "I did not know, my dear." "No, you did not know that I had a tender corner in my heart, a general predilection for commercials. They go about in flights like hummingbirds in the Brazilian forests. Have you been in Brazil, dear?" "No, I have not, but I have read of them. Living, animated jewels they are." "Which, the bagmen or the hummingbirds?" "I won't speak to you any more. You purposely misunderstand me to insult me, that you may go off to your Maggie Finches. There is only one, dear. And so much the worse. You focus, you concentrate on that wretched object, the admiration, the love of which I am bereaved. If you go gallivanting and meandering round dressmakers' assistants, I can do the same. I will not be left out in the cold for any Maggie Finches, I can tell you. There are plenty of bagmen, as you call them, commercials in their proper designation, who would be only too glad, too proud, to lick the dust off my feet." "My dear, you are hot." "Well, I have occasion to be hot." "And my tea is cold." "This is an outrage!" Mrs. Birdwood rose and flounced out of the room. She rushed upstairs, casting at the slavey en passant a notice to quit, for no particular reason, but as a vent to her wrath, and she dashed into the bedroom, where nothing had as yet been put in order, and threw herself in the armchair and burst into a flood of tears. She remained for some time crying and fanning herself into a greater flame of wrath. Then she rose and went to the window. She saw her husband. He had taken off his coat, and he was digging in the garden. He had told her the previous evening that he expected hard frost, and would turn up the mold that the slugs might be killed. Actually, after that scene, after those reproaches hurled at him, after that exposure, he was placidly digging that the frost might kill the slugs. Really, the man was unendurable. About an hour later he drew on his coat and came in, and brushed down his trousers and washed his hands. Mrs. Birdwood lurked about, watching. He went out at the front door, passed into the street, and disappeared. Mrs. Birdwood drew on her cloak, adjusted a hat, and followed. She had hardly reached the gate before she saw Josiah turn in at a door to a shop some way up the street, over which was inscribed, "Thomas, Milliner and Dressmaker." "The die is cast, flaunting his vices in the face of his wife. I, too, can be vicious. If he goes hunting dressmakers, why, even I can seek commercial travellers." She set her lips, her eyes glared, her face was terrible in its wrath. She hastened to retrace her steps, gathered together a few of her most valued and necessary goods, and left the house. "There," she said, slamming the iron gate after her, "there, two can play at this game. If he deserts me, I also can desert him. Good-bye to Jessamine Villa. Oh, that I had married a commercial!" She took her way to the station. "Let me see," said she. "I'll go a-junketing to the seaside and enjoy myself. Happily, I have money. He gave me enough to pay the monthly bills. Won't he be surprised when he comes back from finching to find me flown? Yes, I'll go to Sandbourne and enjoy the sea breezes, and pick up shells and seaweeds, and look at the visitors, and perhaps a commercial or two may flit past my admiring eyes. Their manners are so elegant, they have such persuasive ways, their address is so engaging." Furnished with a ticket, she got into a second-class carriage. She was about to enjoy herself, so she would not go third, and she had money to spend. There was a gentleman in the carriage. He had been seeing a number of large black boxes put into the luggage van. He took his seat after Mrs. Birdwood had ensconced herself in a corner, hoping to have a carriage to herself. Off went the train. As already said, Mrs. Birdwood was a comely woman, and this the other traveller perceived, and was unable to take his eyes off her. If a cat may look at a king, then surely a commercial may gaze on a pretty woman. Mrs. Birdwood did not like it, and put up her hand to let down her veil. Unhappily, in her hurry at leaving, she had forgotten her veil. "Christmas coming soon," said the gentleman, "a time of holly and mince pies, and above all of mistletoe. I think I know some one who would like to be under mistletoe bush with somebody else, unnamed." "And I think," said Mrs. Birdwood, "I know some one who would like to have a bunch of holly with which to whack into somebody else, unnamed." "Going any distance, miss?" asked the bagman. "I don't quite know where I am going," inadvertently replied the runaway wife. Then she bit her tongue in vexation at having said what she had. "Let me recommend Sanborn," said he confidingly. "A charming place, beautiful beach. Excuse me, I think the ticket you hold— Ah, it is for Sanborn. How happy a coincidence! I am going there as well. If I can be of any assistance with your luggage, command me." "I have none." "Indeed! Going to friends?" She was silent. Tears came into her eyes, tears of mortification and anger. "My dear young lady," said the fellow passenger, "I trust I have not touched on any tender point. When lovely woman stoops to conquer, especially with tears as her weapons, she is irresistible." "Really, sir," exclaimed Mrs. Birdwood, "I must request you to desist from these impertinences and this odious familiarity." "1,000 pardons. I am mute." On reaching Sanborn station, Mrs. Birdwood dismounted from the train, greatly relieved to be able to shake off the gentleman who had annoyed her. She sought out a modest inn, and then walked down to the shore. "A pretty pass Josiah will be in," thought she, "when he finds that I am gone. There will be ructions in the house. Well, if he will run after finches, he must take the consequences. And Christmas coming on as well, and no comforts, no plum pudding. I'll be bound that Jemima will serve up the roast beef without any horseradish. Serve him right. And as to Yorkshire pudding, she can't make it. Very glad. He'll suffer where most sensitive. Oh!" She saw a large colored poster. "A circus! I have not seen one since I was a girl. I will go." But she did not enjoy herself at the horsemanship. Her mind reverted to Jessamine Villa, and to a plum pudding she had made a month ago, and had put away in a tin to be ready for Christmas. She wished she had brought it with her, but she had left it behind, locked up. Her husband knew nothing about it. The slavey was equally ignorant. Now that costly and excellent plum pudding would be lost, for she would never go back to Jessamine Villa, never, never within the sound of the name of Finch. That plum pudding had been made from an excellent recipe given her by her mother. 5 pounds suet, 4 pound flour, 3 pound breadcrumbs, 4½ pound raisins, 3 pound currants, 1½ pound sugar, 1 pound mixed peel, 1 pint old ale, 1 nutmeg, 6 teaspoonfuls salt, 2 quarts milk, 12 eggs, boiled 8 hours, a sufficient quantity for 9 puddings, 4 of which are large. She could rehearse it by heart. Of course, in the small establishment at Jessamine Villa, 9 puddings, 4 of which were large, were not required. But the late Mrs. Gubbins had been a woman with a large family and a larger heart, and she had been accustomed to send puddings to her married sons and daughters. Mrs. Birdwood had halved everything, and then had been able to give a pudding to an aunt at Bandon, another she had sent to a married brother in London, a small one she had reserved for a poor old woman who received her charities, and the rest were for Jessamine Villa consumption. And now— "Dear, dear, dear!" sighed Mrs. Birdwood, not observing anything in the arena. "I beg pardon, did you mean me?" asked a voice. She turned and saw the commercial traveller beside her. "No, sir," she retorted sharply. "I alluded to the pudding. With raisins at 5 pence and only 9 eggs a shilling, it is dear, very dear, inexpressibly dear." "I beg pardon again. I don't quite take it in." "The pudding was not for your consumption, sir." You would confer on me, miss, a great favor if you would give me your name. 1,000 apologies for asking. My name is—" She choked. Should she give her married or her maiden name? Never mind. And mine is Fisher. I am in the hosiery and haberdashery business. That is to say, I travel for a firm in that line. I am now staying at the Woolpack. At the Woolpack? Well, so am I, she cried in dismay. This will never do. No, never. She dashed out of the circus, went to the inn, removed her trifling effects, paid her bill, and departed to the Red Lion. Next morning she came down to the coffee-room and was dismayed to find there Mr. Fisher. "Good gracious me!" she exclaimed. "I thought you were at the Woolpack." "So I was, but as it seemed to offend you, and I could not think of annoying a lady, I went back when the performance was over, paid my account, and departed to another inn, the Red Lion." "This will never do," gasped Mrs. Birdwood. "I shall leave immediately." She hastened to the station and took the train for Bandon. She would go to her aunt. The plum pudding had preceded her. If she followed, it was but like a player of bowls, who delivers his ball and then runs after it. Her aunt was pleased to see her, and asked what occasioned this visit. Mrs. Birdwood made the excuse that she wished to see her before Christmas, and that she had friends in Bandon she also desired to see. She had not visited them since she gulped, her marriage. "I dare say, auntie, I may remain here a few days?" "Delighted, my dear, to see you. But you do not intend to remain long, because Christmas is at hand, the day after to-morrow, and of course you will be back for that." Mrs. Birdwood looked down and did not answer. Next morning she went to see friends. About midday she returned, when she was encountered by her aunt in the passage. "My dear, dreadful news. Have you heard?" "Heard? No. What?" "It comes from Jemima's mother, your maid-of-all-work, as you took from here at my recommendation. She writ to her mother yesterday evening, and it is shocking, orful." "What is it, aunt?" Mrs. Birdwood turned white. That slavey had written her that her mistress had run away, and doubtless with amplifications of her own, run away with a commercial in the hosiery and haberdashery line, and had been seen with him at a circus at Sanborn. "You must prepare yourself for the worst," said the aunt. "I know it," gasped Mrs. Birdwood. "I don't see how you can, as it only happened yesterday," said the old lady. "Well, tell me all. Hold back nothing." "Your dear Josiah! He's gone and scalded hisself to death in trying to bile a plum pudding for his Christmas dinner. The flesh is come off in collops, just like an overboiled leg of veal, with rice, you know. Don't cling to the bone. I had a rabbit, too, once." Mrs. Birdwood uttered a cry. She did not stay to hear about the rabbit, but flew to the station. She was just in time to catch a train. She took her ticket she asked for one to Jessamine Villa, but the clerk said there was no such station. Then she recalled the name of the town, in the outskirts of which Jessamine Villa was situated. Weeping, trembling, sick at heart, she sat in the third-class carriage as she was whirled home, to the home she had left, to the husband she had deserted. On reaching the station where she had to disembark, she flew to the villa. From a distance she could see the blinds were drawn down, but then it was evening, and a lamp was alight within. Was it where he was laid out in his bones? She burst in at the door, bathed in a dew of anguish as well as heat, rushed into the sitting-room, and found there Mr. Birdwood in an armchair by the fire, his foot up, reading a catalogue of horticultural structures. "Well, my dear," said he, "back again?" "And you have not been scalded?" "Yes, my foot." "How?" "Jemima said she couldn't make a Christmas plum pudding, and I said we must have one, so I tried my hand." "But the flesh, has it left the bone in collops?" "No, I am blistered, that is all. I spilt the mess over my foot. It was not quite on the boil, I believe." "Goodness me! And how did you make the mess?" "Well, all right. Raisins and flour." "No suet?" "No." "No mixed peel?" "Never thought of it." "Any old ale?" "Of course not." "Nor eggs?" "Did not suppose they were wanted." "Ben," said Mrs. Birdwood, "it was a mess. I'm glad it was all spilt." She heaved a sigh. "Oh, Josiah, how could you?" "I did my level best," he replied. "Now look here. Do you see that parcel? Open it. It is a silk gown, my Christmas present to you, all ready for you to wear to church tomorrow. It was fitted on Maggie Finch, as she is your size and shape." With trembling fingers Mrs. Birdwood opened the parcel and drew forth a really gorgeous silk dress. "Oh!" she said, "and that Finch! She served as dummy on which to fit it, you know. And that was all that took you to Miss Thomas's? What more do you want? Not an evening dress also, low-breasted and shoulder-straps? Oh, Josiah, I have been so wicked. I thought, but never mind what I thought. I intended to run away and desert you. Fancy, forever. Pshaw, you couldn't do it. And to take up with a commercial. My dear, you couldn't do it. And his name is Fisher. Not a hummingbird, but a kingfisher, I suppose. But in the hosiery and haberdashery line, you couldn't do it. "I really believe you are right," said Mrs. Birdwood, throwing herself on his neck and bursting into tears. There, dear, that will suffice," said Josiah. "And," asked his wife, "what did you think when I disappeared?" "I didn't think anything about it. I knew it was all right." "And what have you been doing without me?" "Well, I've been trying to make up my mind whether to have a span or a lean-to conservatory." "You are positively incorrigible." "Then I tried my hand on the plum pudding and failed. So now we shall have to do without." "No, 10,000 times no," replied Mrs. Birdwood triumphantly. She went to a corner cupboard, unlocked it, produced a tin, took off the lid. Here is a real plum pudding for our happy Christmas dinner." "And," said Mr. Birdwood, "I bought a sprig of mistletoe at the door, and will kiss you under it." End of A Plum Pudding by Sabine Baring Gould. Number 7 of A Christmas Miscellany, 2018, by Various. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Number 7, A Christmas Tree, by Sabine Baring Gould. Tom Stephen was dressed in his very best, a black coat, a tie of blue satin studded with veritable planets, and in it a new zodiacal sign, a fox in full career that formed the head of a pin. Tom's collar was so stiffly starched and so high that to turn his head and look over the top of that wall of china was impossible. If he desired to see that which lay to his right or left, he was compelled to turn his entire body, as on a pivot. Tom was unaccustomed to such a rig-out, and therefore did not look happy in it. Tom, in his workaday suit of the color of the earth, with a string tied under his knees, gathered the trouser together, and with a dusty slouch wide-awake stuck at the back of his head, but on one side of that, and with his great, honest, cheery face, ever with a smile on the lips and a dancing light in his eyes, thus Tom was picturesque, delightful. But Tom, in his Sunday best, did not look at his best. The day was Christmas Eve, and there was to be a supper with a dance at the Hall, given by the squire to his workmen and their families. Tom was on his way to this, with a face that shone with yellow soap and the friction of a rough towel, and not only so, but he was to attend thither Isabella Froude, the belle of the village, and one with whom, as every one said, he had made it up, and a handsome couple they would be. "Bless ye," said Tom, when folks asked him when it would be. "Lor bless ye, you know more about it than me. Go and ask Bella. She can fix it. 'Tain't my place, you know." And then he laughed, and thought he had said a good thing. Tom Stephen was an active, intelligent young fellow, serving as under-gardener, getting a respectable wage, and there was positively no reason why he should not marry. But he was inert in just this one particular, or unable to make up his mind. Isabella was 3 years his junior, with a very delicate skin and lovely rosy complexion, fair hair, and forget-me-not blue eyes, somewhat doll-like, save in this, that a doll is never self-conscious, and self-consciousness spoke out of every look of Bella's eyes, every turn of her head, every motion of her body. But was she to be blamed? I think not. The squire always had a pleasant word to give her. The young ladies at the hall made much of her. Every one with one voice declared that she was a beauty and the pride of the village. Under such circumstances she must have been endowed with unusual common sense and strength of character not to have become vain and self-satisfied. Bella lived at the lodge, and it was her practice to open the gates when carriages drove up, and on such occasions she was quite aware that the ladies, and above all the gentlemen, looked at her, and when immediately after passing she saw them turn to each other and say something, then she was confident that they said, "What a pretty girl!" and being obliged to keep herself neat and nicely dressed, did much towards making her attractive. It was understood, or half understood, that Tom would call at the lodge on his way to the hall and pick up Isabella and go on with her. It was in this way. The day before, Tom had said to her, "More wonderful thing, mayhap, Belle, than that I should come and fetch you away to the hall tomorrow, and then you'll give me the first dance in 5 arter." "Well, I'm sure I don't mind," she had replied, and so it was understood that he should go for her, and that she should expect him. "Why, whatever you be about, Polly?" exclaimed Tom Mount Stephen, as he called upon a tall, pale girl with pick and spade over her shoulder. That girl was Mary Mauduit, who lived with a frail, suffering little sister in a cottage, and supported herself by needlework and starching and washing. She had been a teacher in the school, but had been compelled to resign, owing to her sister's health. These two were together, and they were orphans. The child could not be left. "Why, Tom, how fine you be! Where you be going to?" That was the way in the country. A question begets another before it is answered. "I be going to the hall. There's grand goings on there tonight." "So I've heerd, but I didn't mind it, and I reckon that Bella will be there too." "For certain, but what are you about with pick and shovel, I'd like for to know?" "Well, if you must know everything, Tom, it's for little Bess." "Not going to dip a grave?" Tom would have bitten his tongue out. He was mad with himself for uttering such a question. It had bounced out of his mouth without thought, and now he saw the color rush into Mary's face, her eyes fill, and her lips tremble. "Oh, hang me for an idjit," said Tom. "I mean it. It's just my ways, Paul. I want to say something smart and just say the wrong thing always. But what be about with them tools?" "Well, it's this, Tom. I thought I'd give little Bessie a Christmas tree. I've got a few trifles to hang on it, some oranges and nuts and a needle case and so. And I got Mrs. Wannacott to come in for an hour and sit with she whilst I went to the plantation after a tree. The squire gave me leave," she added in explanation and self-exculpation. "But, dear heart alive, you don't want a pick and spade for getting up a young spruce. You want the chopper or a little handsaw." "I don't wish to kill the tree. I thought if I get her up by the roots, I could plant her again in the garden, and she'd grow up to a big tree, and it'd be something to look at, every year growing bigger." "What size tree do you want?" "Not such a terrible big one, just middlin' like. I can't have her too small, as I ain't got no tapers like the tiny red and yaller and green uns they had up to the parsonage last Christmas. I've only got bits of common candle ends, and they'd be too heavy for a mite of a tree. How will you bring back your tree in the moors?" "Roots, Mary, with soil and pick all together." "Well, I reckon I can make 2 journeys." "You can't make 2 for the tree." Mary stood silent. "I tell you what I'll do, Polly. I'll off with this dratted collar and put aside my new coat and away with you to the plantation. If you go and mistake and have up a deodora or a Douglas instead of spruce, the squire'll kick and scream." "Oh, you're too kind, Tom, but you'll be late for the entertainment." "Oh, that's nothing. Not 2 minutes. She'll wait." He did not explain, but Polly understood that she signified Bella. But she did not know that it had been understood that Tom was to fetch the pretty girl from the lodge. "I dare say you'll let me put my coat and that dratted collar in your cottage. Lord, Polly, I'm like a donkey in a pound when I've got that collar on, jumping up and down and trying to look over the wall and clear it if I can." A couple of minutes later, Tom, divested of collar and coat, with pick and spade over his shoulder, was attending Mary Mauduit when the head gardener passed. He was a Scotchman and a widower, a man of much self-confidence and independence. "What, off, Mr. Mount Stephen?" The gardener addressed his subordinates with a Mr. It made himself more important, marked the distance between them more emphatically. "Yes, Mr. McSweeney, just to take up a young spruce for she." "Ta-ta," said the Scotchman condescendingly, and passed on. "It's been a bit stuffy with me," said Tom, confidingly to his companion. "What it's all about I can't tell. Perhaps he guesses I knows too much, but, Lord, I'm not one to blab." "Perhaps he's a little jealous," said Mary slyly. "Folks do say he has been thinking about Bella, but there, 'tain't no good dreaming of going against you, Tom. I don't have no need to them tales. People will talk. Besides, if he were looking out for a Mrs. McSweeney, I reckon he'd go after widders. Ain't he a widderer hisself?" "That don't follow," said Mary. "Don't it? Then it art," retorted Tom. "There, don't be snuffy with me," said Mary. The getting up of a suitable tree and its transport to the cottage of the Mauduits was not a matter of 2 minutes, nor of half an hour. Tom was aware that Isabella would have been kept waiting, but he relieved his mind with the consideration that she would take it for granted that he was detained by some business, and would walk on alone to the hall. The distance was trifling. He could explain matters when he arrived, and she would at once understand the circumstances. "I don't see how you're going to stick them candle ends onto the branches," said Tom. "I shall heat hairpins and run 'em through." "That's fine!" exclaimed Mount Stephen derisively. "And when the candles be burning, the flame will heat the hairpins red hot, and they'll melt the composite, and there'll be a pretty mess, and the candle ends falling about on all sides and fire and everything. I hope you're insured." "Oh, I can manage it." "No, you can't. Excuse me, Polly, I reckon mother at home has got some bits of tapers from the parsonage tree last year. Her was up there helping, and they throwed the tree away when done with, and her's a sevin woman and can't abide no waste, and I know her pulled off and kept the remains of candles. They have wires for handling of them on. If you don't mind my leaving that collar here, you won't let nothing damage it, nor let the cat get at it, will you, Polly? I'll run home and see what mother have got. I couldn't run in that collar. 'Twould be sheer impossible." So, instead of going on to the hall, here was another detention. But Tom was a good-natured lad. He was not needed at the hall, and here at the cottage he was of real assistance. After the young man had been away nearly a quarter of an hour, he returned with a small box full of portions of tapers, and some entire, and sundry little sparkling ornaments that had furnished the tree the preceding Christmas, and had been cast aside, but saved by the prudent and frugal Mrs. Mountstephen. "And here, Polly," said Tom, "here's a spotted dog in china as stood on my mantel-shelf that little Bessie be welcome to. You can set it under the tree. Now I'll clap the tree mores into a tub, and then I'm off to the hall." When Tom, reinvested in collar and coat, arrived at the lodge and inquired for Isabella, he learnt, which did not much surprise him, that she had gone forward. So he went to the hall by himself, not greatly concerned at being late. He knew that all who were invited would not be able to arrive punctually. There would be 2 sittings down to supper, and he would be in time for the second. When he arrived, he looked about him for Isabella, and saw her seated beside the Scotch gardener, who was helping her to trifle. With a little difficulty he made his way behind the chairs, and in and out among the servants who were waiting on the guest, to where Isabella was dipping into the trifle. "So sorry, Bella, I couldn't help it," said he. "Oh, delicious!" said Bella. "I beg your pardon?" "I was speaking to Mr. McSweeney. I only want to say I was unavoidably detained." "The jam is strawberry," said Bella. "Whole strawberries from our own garden," said McSweeney. "I'm very fond of strawberries," observed Bella. "So am I," said the Scotch gardener. "Have some more. I'll remember you in the strawberry time, and send you up the first dish I ripen. Course I'll ripen 'em early in the greenhouse. You shall have some as soon as they're fit to be picked." "How good of you, Mr. McSweeney!" "Not at all. I live but to oblige. And you—" He looked round at her. "For you I would do anything." "Bella," said Tom over her chair, I really could not help it." "Will you please to move, Mr. Mountstephen? You are jogging my chair." "Do you like grapes?" asked McSweeney. "I rather flatter myself on my grapes. I am able to keep them, too, so well. My large white muscats. But there, you shall have some. I'll send you up a really choice bunch. I think the second sitters down are coming in now. Miss Isabella, if you have done, we will rise and let the others take our places. Here, you, Mont Stephen, can have my seat. If you've brought Mary Mauduit, I have no doubt she can have Miss Frode's chair." Poor Tom did not enjoy his supper, and that over, when he sought Isabella to tender his excuses, she deliberately turned her back on him. It was clear McSweeney had made mischief. He had told her that for the sake of that pale Polly Mauduit he had neglected to fulfill his engagement and keep his appointment. Dancing began, and Bella sat out with the Scotch gardener, who was too serious a man to approve of the light fantastic toe. As he explained to Bella, it was against his principles. "But don't let that interfere with your enjoyment if you wish to go to Mr. Mont Stephen." "Oh, not at all," said Miss Froude. Huffed, hurt, poor Tom withdrew. He slunk away from the hall. Among so many he would not be missed, and of enjoyment there was none after his rebuff. It would madden him to see how Bella carried on with the Scotchman. He walked through the park, groaning, grumbling, resentful. He was not angry with himself for not keeping his appointment, nor with Polly for having detained him, but with Bella, whom he designated as a minx, and with McSweeney, whom he termed a widdered Scottish rogue. He left the park. He walked hastily on. Then, finding that in the agitation of his feelings he could not keep his head in one position, and that he was consequently liable to cut his throat, he halted and took off his collar, and fastened it by the stud round his left arm above the elbow. Presently he reached the cottage of the Mauduits, and he could see through the little window that the tree was alight. It twinkled through the panes. The temptation to turn aside, rap at the door, and enter was not to be resisted. To his knock he received an answer as he opened the door. The answer came from an inner room. "It be I, Polly," called Tom. "Just passin' and want to see how Bessie be enjoyin' of herself." Come in, Tom." The young man strode through the kitchen into the adjoining chamber. There lay, in her bed, the sick girl, a lovely child, with large, burning, dark eyes and a hectic flame in her cheeks. She was supported in the arms of her sister, and was looking with delight at the little candles, at the oranges, and the glittering tin ornaments. "Tom," said Mary, "Bessie do thank you for the spotted dog." "Yes, I do," said the sick child, striving to lift herself and extend a hand to the young gardener. "But gracious me, Tom!" exclaimed Mary, "whatever is the meaning of that?" pointing to the white band round his arm. "It is like what folks put on now when in mourning, only it's white." "He's going to be married," said the sick child. "It is only that stiff collar. I couldn't bear it no longer," exclaimed Tom. Then the child laughed and laughed till she coughed. Suddenly Mary uttered a cry. Tom saw a crimson stream. "Run, run, Tom! For heaven's sake, run for the doctor!" And Tom ran. In half an hour he returned. Polly was kneeling by the bed. On it lay the child, the face almost white, but yet with a little color in the delicate cheek. Her hand held tightly that of her sister. The doctor had not come. He was out. Would not be back till morning. Tom could not explain this, and he knew, moreover, that the surgeon could effect nothing. Without a word he knelt also by the child's bedside. The candles were quivering to extinction on the Christmas tree. One was guttering and sending a stream of wax over the head of the spotted dog. Then another fell, twinkling, through the boughs and went out, and at the same time the light went out in Bessie's eyes. A few days later, when the earth had closed over the child, Tom was speaking with Mary, and she said to him, "Tom, I think now I should like that Christmas tree be planted on the little maid's grave. Will you oblige me by doing it?" Then, after wiping her eyes, "Tom, that is a tree of death." The head gardener triumphantly carried away Bella. The marriage took place within 6 weeks of the Christmas supper and dance. Isabella Froude had become Mrs. Sandy McSweeney, and was planted in the gardener's beautiful cottage. But in all things human there comes a change. Within a very short time certain matters started to light. What these were you shall hear from the squire's own lips as he addressed Tom Stephen. "Tom," said the squire, his broad, rosy face very hot and agitated, "Tom, I've bundled McSweeney off. I don't see why I should have to buy the fruit I grow from the greengrocer in our market town. I don't see why, if I purchase bulbs and greenhouse plants, they should invariably disappear and be reported to have died. I don't see why, if I buy flower seeds, they should come up in other folks' gardens. I have not been able to get fruit for my table without sending to town to buy it. I have been ruined in procuring vast supplies of choice plants from nurserymen, and have not enjoyed them. McSweeney is off. Hang it, you may not be a professional and A1 and all that, but you are honest as daylight. I feel I can trust you, and dash my buttons, there is the situation vacant for you, if you choose to have it. And there is the cottage. The only disadvantage is that it is too large for you, and you are unmarried." "Oh, as to that, sir, that is easily remedied. I be just now on my way to the parson to get him to have marry me as next Sunday." "Mary? Mary who?" "Mary Mauduit, sir." "Oh, oh! I wish you joy. An excellent girl. There it is for you, the house, Tom. You and Mary shall go into it as soon as I have seen the back of McSweeney and his Bella, and have had it whitewashed. And hang it, Tom, here, come round to my study, and I'll give you a cheque for £10 towards the furnishing." "Oh, I thank you, sir. I thank you with all my heart." "No need of thanks, Tom. Bless my soul, when a master has a trustworthy, honest servant, it is he who is to be counted lucky, and unless he is an ass, he will keep him. There, come round to the study." And now nearly 2 years have passed, and this time we see a little party coming out of the church porch. As I live, it is Tom with Mary, no longer Mauduit, but Mont Stephen. But they are not alone. There is a baby in a long white robe being brought forth, a babe that had been carried into church to be christened. As Mary stood in the autumn sunlight outside the porch, she touched Tom's arm and said, "Let us go to little Bessie's grave." And they went, and the baby was taken there also, over the drooping grass, wet with autumn rains. "The poor little Christmas tree," said Mary, "although a tree of death, lives. See how hearty it appears." "It is no tree of death," answered Tom. "See, here is the first fir cone. It is alive and bears seed. It is no tree of death, but a tree of life." And then Tom laughed. "Mary," said he, "I think for once in my life I've said a good thing." But Mary did not applaud. "Tom, do you think the little fir cone really has life in it?" "Of course it has." Mary picked it and then put it into the tiny hand of the baby. "Look, Tom," she said, "but for that Christmas tree you and I would never have become what we are to each other, and now in it is the seed of life, and so on and on and on for evermore. Our baby has it, and it shall be sown, and so, really, Tom, there seems to be no end to life. It goes on forever and forever." "Amen," responded Tom. End of A Christmas Tree by Sabine Baring Gould. Number 8 of A Christmas Miscellany 2018 by Various. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Number 8, The Mistletoe Bough by Anthony Trollope. "Let the boys have it if they like it," said Mrs. Garrel, pleading to her only daughter on behalf of her 2 sons. "Pray don't, mamma," said Elizabeth Garrel. "It only means romping. To me all that is detestable, and I am sure it is not the sort of thing that Miss Holmes would like." "Well, we always had it at Christmas when we were young." "But, mamma, the world is so changed." The point in dispute was one very delicate in its nature, hardly to be discussed in all its bearings, even in fiction, and the very mention of which between mother and daughter showed a great amount of close confidence between them. It was no less than this: Should that branch of mistletoe which Frank Garrow had brought home with him out of the Lowther woods be hung up on Christmas Eve in the dining room at Thwaite Hall, according to his wishes? Or should permission for such hanging be positively refused? It was clearly a thing not to be done after such a discussion, and therefore the decision given by Mrs. Garrow was against it. I am inclined to think that Miss Garrow was right in saying that the world is changed as touching mistletoe boughs. Kissing, I fear, is less innocent now than it used to be when our grandmothers were alive, and we have become more fastidious in our amusements. Nevertheless, I think that she made herself fairly open to the raillery with which her brothers attacked her. "On y soit qui mal y pense," said Frank, who was 18. "Nobody will want to kiss you, my dear fine airs," said Harry, who was just a year younger. "Because you choose to be a Puritan, there are to be no more cakes and ale in the house," said Frank. "Still waters run deep, we all know that," said Harry. The boys had not been present when the matter was decided between Mrs. Garrow and her daughter, nor had the mother been present when these little amenities had passed between the brother and sister. "Only that mamma has said it wouldn't seem to go against her," said Frank. "But as my father, he wouldn't give way to such nonsense, I know." Elizabeth turned away without answering and left the room. Her eyes were full of tears, but she would not let them see that they had vexed her. They were only 2 days home from school, and for the last week before their coming, all her thoughts had been to prepare for their Christmas pleasures. She had arranged their rooms, making everything warm and pretty. Out of her own pocket she had bought a shot bolt for one and skates for the other. She had told the old groom that her pony was to belong exclusively to Master Harry for the holidays, and now Harry told her that still waters ran deep. She had been driven to the use of all her eloquence in inducing her father to purchase that gun for Frank, and now Frank called her a Puritan. And why? She did not choose that a mistletoe bough should be hung in her father's hall when Godfrey Holmes was coming to visit him. She could not explain this to Frank, but Frank might have had the wit to understand it. But Frank was thinking only of Patty Coverdale, a blue-eyed little romp of 16, who, with her sister Kate, was coming from Penrith to spend the Christmas at Thwaite Hall. Elizabeth left the room with her slow, graceful step, hiding her tears, hiding all emotion, as latterly she had taught herself that it was feminine to do. "There goes my Lady Fine Airs," said Harry, sending his shrill voice after her. Thwaite Hall was not a place of much pretension. It was a moderate-sized house, surrounded by pretty gardens and shrubberies, close down upon the River Eamont on the Westmoreland side of the river, looking over to a lovely wooded bank in Cumberland. All the world knows that the Eamont runs out of Ullswater, dividing the two counties, passing under Pendrith Bridge, and by the old ruins of Brougham Castle, below which it joins the Eden. Thwaite Hall nestled down close upon the clear, rocky stream about half-way between Ullswater and Penrith, and had been built just at a bend of the river. The windows of the dining parlour and of the drawing-room stood at right angles to each other, and yet each commanded a reach of the stream. Immediately from a side of the house steps were cut down through the red rock to the water's edge, and here a small boat was always moored to a chain. The chain was stretched across the river, fixed to the staples driven into the rock on either side, and the boat was pulled backwards and forwards over the stream, without aid from oars or paddles. From the opposite side a path led through the woods and across the fields to Penrith, and this was the route commonly used between Thwaite Hall and the town. Major Garrow was a retired officer of engineers, who had seen service in all parts of the world, and who was now spending the evening of his days on a small property which had come to him from his father. He held in his own hands about 20 acres of land, and he was the owner of one small farm close by, which was let to a tenant. That, together with his half-pay and the interest of his wife's £1,000, sufficed to educate his children and keep the wolf at a comfortable distance from his door. He himself was a spare, thin man, with quiet, lazy, literary habits. He had done the work of life, but had so done it as to permit of his enjoying that which was left to him. His sole remaining care was the establishment of his children, and, as far as he could see, he had no ground for anticipating disappointment. They were clever, good-looking, well-disposed young people, and upon the whole it may be said that the sun shone brightly on Thwaite Hall. Of Mrs. Garrow it may suffice to say that she always deserved such sunshine. For years past it had been the practice of the family to have some sort of gathering at Thwaite Hall during Christmas. Godfrey Holmes had been left under the guardianship of Major Garrow, and as he had always spent his Christmas holidays with his guardian, this perhaps had given rise to the practice. Then the Coverdales were cousins of the Garrows, and they had usually been there as children. At the Christmas last past the custom had been broken, for young Holmes had been abroad. Previous to that they had all been children, excepting him, but now that they were to meet again they were no longer children. Elizabeth, at any rate, was not so, for she had already counted 19 winters, and Isabella Holmes was coming. Now Isabella was 2 years older than Elizabeth, and had been educated in Brussels. Moreover, she was comparatively a stranger at Thwaite Hall, never having been at those early Christmas meetings. And now I must take permission to begin my story by telling a lady's secret. Elizabeth Garrow had already been in love with Godfrey Holmes, or perhaps it might be more becoming to say that Godfrey Holmes had already been in love with her. They had already been engaged, and alas, they had already agreed that that engagement should be broken off. Young Holmes was now 27 years of age, and was employed in a bank at Liverpool, not as a clerk, but as assistant manager, with a large salary. He was a man well-to-do in the world, who had money also of his own, and who might well afford to marry. Some 2 years since, on the eve of leaving Thwaite Hall, he had with low doubting whisper told Elizabeth that he loved her, and she had flown trembling to her mother. "Godfrey, my boy," the father said to him as he parted with him the next morning, "Bessie is only a child, and too young to think of this yet." At the next Christmas Godfrey was in Italy, and the thing was gone by. So at least the father and mother said to each other. But the young people had met in the summer, and one joyful letter had come from the girl home to her mother. "I have accepted him. Dearest, dearest mamma, I do love him, but don't tell papa yet, for I have not quite accepted him. I think I am sure, but I am not quite sure. I am not quite sure about him." And then, 2 days after that, there had come a letter that was not at all joyful. "Dearest mamma, it is not to be. It is not written in the book. We have both agreed that it will not do. I am so glad that you have not told dear papa, for I could never make him understand. You will understand, for I shall tell you everything, down to his very words. But we have agreed that there shall be no quarrel. It shall be exactly as it was, and he will come at Christmas all the same. It would never do that he and papa should be separated, nor could we now put off Isabella. It is better so in every way, for there is, and need be, no quarrel. We still like each other. I am sure I like him, but I know that I should not make him happy as his wife. He says it is my fault. I, at any rate, have never told him that I thought it his. From all which it will be seen that the confidence between the mother and daughter was very close. Elizabeth Garrow was a very good girl, but it might almost be a question whether she was not too good. She had learned, or thought that she had learned, that most girls are vapid, silly, and useless, given chiefly to pleasure-seeking and a hankering after lovers, and she had resolved that she would not be such a one. Industry, self-denial, and a religious purpose in life were the tasks which she set herself, and she went about the performance of them with much courage. But such tasks, though they are excellently well adapted to fit a young lady for the work of living, may also be carried too far, and thus have the effect of unfitting her for that work. When Elizabeth Garrow made up her mind that the finding of a husband was not the only purpose of life, she did very well. It is very well that a young lady should feel herself capable of going through the world happily without one. But in teaching herself this, she also taught herself to think that there was a certain merit in refusing herself the natural delight of a lover, even though the possession of the lover were compatible with all her duties to herself, her father and mother, and the world at large. It was not that she had determined to have no lover. She made no such resolve, and when the proper lover came, he was admitted to her heart. But she declared to herself unconsciously that she must put a guard upon herself, lest she should be betrayed into weakness by her own happiness. She had resolved that in loving her lord she would not worship him, and that in giving her heart she would only so give it as it should be given to a human creature like herself. She had acted on these high resolves, and hence it had come to pass, not unnaturally, that Mr. Godfrey Holmes had told her that it was her fault. She was a pretty, fair girl, with soft, dark brown hair and soft, long, dark eyelashes. Her gray eyes, though quiet in their tone, were tender and lustrous. Her face was oval, and the lines of her cheek and chin perfect in their symmetry. She was generally quiet in her demeanour, but when moved she could rouse herself to great energy, and speak with feeling, and almost with fire. Her fault was a reverence for martyrdom in general, and a feeling, of which she was unconscious, that it became a young woman to be unhappy in secret. That it became a young woman, I might rather say, to have a source of unhappiness hidden from the world in general, and endured without any detriment to her outward cheerfulness. We know the story of the Spartan boy who held the fox under his tunic. The fox was biting into him, into the very entrails, but the young hero spake never a word. Now Bessie Garrow was inclined to think that it was a good thing to have a fox always biting, so that the torment caused no ruining to her outward smiles. Now at this moment the fox within her bosom was biting her sore enough, but she bore it without flinching. "If you would rather that he should not come, I will have it arranged," her mother had said to her. "Not for worlds," she had answered. "I should never think well of myself again." Her mother had changed her own mind more than once as to the conduct in this matter which might be best for her to follow, thinking solely of her daughter's welfare. "If he comes, they will be reconciled, and she will be happy," had been her first idea. But then there was a stern fixedness of purpose in Bessie's words when she spoke of Mr. Holmes, which had expelled this hope, and Mrs. Garrow had for a while thought it better that the young man should not come. But Bessie would not permit this. It would vex her father, put out of course the arrangements of other people, and display weakness on her own part. He should come, and she would endure without flinching while the fox gnawed at her. That battle of the mistletoe had been fought on the morning before Christmas Day, and the Holmeses came on Christmas Eve. Isabella was comparatively a stranger, and therefore received at first the greater share of attention. She and Elizabeth had once seen each other, and for the last year or two had corresponded, but personally they had never been intimate. Unfortunately for the latter, that story of Godfrey's offer and acceptance had been communicated to Isabella, as had, of course, the immediately subsequent story of their separation. But now it would be almost impossible to avoid the subject in conversation. "Dearest Isabella, let it be as though it had never been," she had said in one of her letters. "But sometimes it is very difficult to let things be as though they had never been." The first evening passed over very well. The two Coverdale girls were there, and there had been much talking and merry laughter, rather juvenile in its nature, but on the whole none the worse for that. Isabella Holmes was a fine, tall, handsome girl, good-humoured and well disposed to be pleased, rather Frenchified in her manners, and quite able to take care of herself. But she was not above round games, and did not turn up her nose at the boys. Godfrey behaved himself excellently, talking much to the Major, but by no means avoiding Miss Garrow. Mrs. Garrow, though she had known him since he was a boy, had taken an aversion to him since he had quarrelled with her daughter, but there was no room on this first night for showing such aversion, and everything went off well. "Godfrey is very much improved," the Major said to his wife that night. "Do you think so?" "Indeed I do. He has filled out and become a fine man." "Oh, in personal appearance, you mean? Yes, he's well-looking enough." "And in his manner, too. He is doing uncommonly well in Liverpool, I can tell you. And if he should think of Bessie—" "There is nothing of that sort," said Mrs. Garrow. "He did speak to me, you know, 2 years ago. Bessie was too young then, and so indeed was he. But if she likes him—" "I don't think she does." "Then there's an end of it." And so they went to bed. "Frank," said the sister to her elder brother, knocking at his door when they had all gone upstairs, "may I come in, if you are not in bed?" "In bed?" said he, looking up with some little pride from his Greek book. "I've got 150 lines to do before I can get to bed. It'll be 2, I suppose. I've got to mug uncommon hard these holidays. I have only one more half, you know, and then—" "Don't overdo it, Frank." "No, I won't overdo it. I mean to take 1 day a week and work 8 hours a day on the other 5. That will be 40 hours a week, and will give me just 200 hours for the holidays. I have got it all down here on a table. That will be 105 for Greek play, 40 for algebra," and so he explained to her the exact destiny of all his long hours of proposed labour. He had as yet been home a day and a half, and had succeeded in drawing out with red lines and blue figures the tables which he showed her. "If I can do that, it will be pretty well, won't it?" "But, Frank, you've come home for your holidays, to enjoy yourself." "But a fellow must work nowadays." "Don't overdo it, dear, that's all." "But, Frank, I could not rest if I went to bed without speaking to you. You made me unhappy to-day." "Did I, Bessie?" "You called me a Puritan, and then you quoted that ill-natured French proverb at me. Do you really believe your sister thinks evil, Frank?" And as she spoke she put her arm caressingly around his neck. "Oh, of course I don't." "Then why say so? Harry is so much younger and so thoughtless that I can bear what he says without so much suffering. But if you and I are not friends, I shall be very wretched. If you knew how I have looked forward to your coming home." "I did not mean to vex you, and I won't say such things again." "That's my own, Frank. What I said to mamma, I said because I thought it right. But you must not say I am a Puritan. I would do anything in my power to make your holidays bright and pleasant. I know that boys require so much more to amuse them than girls do. Good night, dearest. Pray don't overdo yourself with work, and do take care of your eyes." So saying, she kissed him and went her way. In 20 minutes after that he had gone to sleep over his book, and when he woke up to find the candle guttering down, he resolved that he would not begin his measured hours till Christmas Day was fairly over. The morning of Christmas Day passed very quietly. They all went to church, and then sat round the fire chatting until the 4 o'clock dinner was ready. The Coverdale girls thought it was rather more dull than former Thwaite Hall festivities, and Frank was seen to yawn. But then everybody knows that the real fun of Christmas never begins till the day itself be past. The beef and pudding are ponderous, and unless there be absolute children in the party, there is a difficulty in grafting any special afternoon amusements on the Sunday pursuits of the morning. In the evening they were to have a dance. That had been distinctly promised to Patty Coverdale, but the dance would not commence till 8. The beef and pudding were ponderous, but with due efforts they were overcome and disappeared. The glass of port was sipped, the almonds and raisins were nibbled, and then the ladies left the room. 10 minutes after that, Elizabeth found herself seated with Isabella Holmes over the fire in her father's little book-room. It was not by her that this meeting was arranged, for she dreaded such a constrained confidence. But of course it could not be avoided, and perhaps it might be as well now as hereafter. "Bessie," said the elder girl, "I am dying to be alone with you for a moment." "Well, you shall not die. That is, if being alone with me will save you." "I have so much to say to you, and if you have any true friendship in you, you also will have so much to say to me." Miss Garrow, perhaps, had no true friendship in her at that moment, for she would gladly have avoided saying anything, had that been possible. But in order to prove that she was not deficient in friendship, she gave her friend her hand. "And now tell me everything about Godfrey," said Isabella. "Dear Bella, I have nothing to tell, literally nothing." "That is nonsense. Stop a moment, dear, and understand that I do not mean to offend you. It cannot be that you have nothing to tell, if you choose to tell it. You are not the girl to have accepted Godfrey without loving him, nor is he the man to have asked you without loving you. When you write me word that you have changed your mind, as you might about a dress, of course I know you have not told me all. Now I insist upon knowing it, that is, if we are to be friends. I would not speak a word to Godfrey till I had seen you, in order that I might hear your story first." "Indeed, Bella, there is no story to tell." "Then I must ask him." "If you wish to play the part of a true friend to me, you will let the matter pass by and say nothing. You must understand that, circumstanced as we are, your brother's visit here, what I mean is, that it is very difficult for me to act and speak exactly as I should do, and a few unfortunate words spoken may make my position unendurable." "Will you answer me, then, one question?" "I cannot tell. I think I will." "Do you love him?" For a moment or two Bessie remained silent, striving to arrange her words so that they should contain no falsehood and yet betray no truth. "Ah, I see you do," continued Miss Holmes. "But of course you do. Why else did you accept him?" "I fancied that I did, as young ladies do sometimes fancy." "And will you say that you do not now?" Again Bessie was silent, and then her friend rose from her seat. "I see it all," she said. "What a pity it was that you both had not some friend like me by you at the time, but perhaps it may not be too late." I need not repeat at length all the protestations which upon this were poured forth with hot energy by poor Bessie. She endeavoured to explain how great had been the difficulty of her position. This Christmas visit had been arranged before that unhappy affair at Liverpool had occurred. Isabella's visit had been partly one of business, it being necessary that certain money affairs should be arranged between her, her brother, and the Major. "I determined," said Bessie, "not to let my feelings stand in the way, and hoped that things might settle down to their former friendly footing. I already fear that I have been wrong, but it will be ungenerous in you to punish me." Then she went on to say that if anybody attempted to interfere with her, she would at once go away to her mother's sister, who lived at Hexham in Northumberland. Then came the dance, and the hearts of Kate and Patty Coverdale were at last happy. But here again poor Bessie was made to understand how terribly difficult was this experiment in entertaining, on a footing of friendship, a lover with whom she had quarrelled only a month or two before. That she must as a necessity become the partner of Godfrey Holmes she had already calculated, and so much she was prepared to endure. Her brothers would of course dance with the Coverdale girls, and her father would of course stand up with Isabella. There was no other possible arrangement, at any rate as a beginning. She had schooled herself, too, as to the way in which she would speak to him on the occasion, and how she would remain mistress of herself and of her thoughts. But when the time came, the difficulty was almost too much for her. "You do not care much for dancing, if I remember," said he. "Oh, yes, I do. Not as Patty Coverdale does. It's a passion with her. But then I am older than Patty Coverdale." After that he was silent for a minute or two. "It seems so odd to me to be here," he said. It was odd. She felt that it was odd, but he ought not to have said so. 2 years make a great difference. The boys have grown so much." "Yes, and there are other things," said he. "Bella was never here before, at least not with you." "No, but I did not exactly mean that." "All that would not make the place so strange. But your mother seems altered to me. She used to be almost like my own mother." "I suppose she finds that you are a more formidable person as you grow older. It was all very well scolding you when you were a clerk in the bank, but it does not do to scold the manager. These are the penalties men pay for becoming great. Oh, it is not my greatness that stands in my way, but then I'm sure I cannot say what it is. But Patty will scold you if you do not mind the figure, though you were the whole board of directors packed into one. She won't respect you if you neglect your present work. When Bessie went to bed that night, she began to feel that she had attempted too much. "Mamma," she said, "could I not make some excuse and go away to Aunt Mary?" "What, now?" "Yes, mamma, now, tomorrow. I need not say that it will make me very unhappy to be away at such a time, but I begin to think that it will be better." "What will papa say?" "You must tell him all." "And Aunt Mary must be told also. You would not like that. Has he said anything?" "No, nothing. Very little, that is. But Bella has spoken to me. Oh, mamma, I think we have been very wrong in this. That is, I have been wrong. I feel as though I should disgrace myself and turn the whole party here into a misfortune." It would be dreadful, that telling of the story to her father and to her aunt, and such a necessity must if possible be avoided. Should such a necessity actually come, the former task would no doubt be done by her mother, but that would not lighten the load materially. After a fortnight she would again meet her father, and would be forced to discuss it. "I will remain, if it be possible," she said. "But, mamma, if I wish to go, you will not stop me?" Her mother promised that she would not stop her, but strongly advised her to stand her ground. On the following morning, when she came downstairs before breakfast, she found Frank standing in the hall with his gun, of which he was trying the lock. "It is not loaded, is it, Frank?" said she. "Oh, dear, no. No one thinks of loading nowadays till he has got out of the house. Directly after breakfast I am going across with Godfrey to the back of Greystock to see after some moorfowl. He asked me to go, and I couldn't well refuse." "Well, of course not. Why should you?" "It will be deuced hard to make up the time. I was to have been up at 4 this morning, but that alarm went off and never woke me. However, I shall be able to do something to-night." "Don't make a slavery of your holidays, Frank. What's the use of having a new gun if you're not to use it?" "It's not the new gun. I'm not such a child as that comes to. But you see, Godfrey is here, and one ought to be civil to him. I'll tell you what I want you girls to do, Bessie. You must come and meet us on our way home. Come over in the boat and along the path to the Patterdale Road. We'll be there under the hill about 5. "And if you are not, we are to wait in the snow?" "Don't make difficulties, Bessie. I tell you we will be there. We are to go in the cart, and so shall have plenty of time." "And how do you know the other girls will go?" "Why, to tell you the truth, Patty Coverdale has promised. As for Miss Holmes, if she won't, why, you must leave her at home with mamma. But Kate and Patty can't come without you." "Your discretion has found that out, has it?" "They say so. But you will come, won't you, Bessie? As for waiting, it's all nonsense. Of course you can walk on, but we'll be at the stile by 5. I've got my watch, you know." And then Bessie promised him. What would she not have done for him that was in her power to do? "Go? Of course I'll go," said Miss Holmes. "I'm up to anything. I'd have gone with them this morning, and have taken a gun if they'd asked me. But, by the by, I'd better not." "Why not?" said Patty, who was hardly yet without fear lest something should mar the expedition. "What will 3 gentlemen do with 4 ladies?" "Oh, I forgot," said Patty, innocently. "I'm sure I don't care," said Kate. "You may have Harry if you like." "Thank you for nothing," said Miss Holmes. "I want one for myself. It's all very well for you to make the offer, but what should I do if Harry won't have me? There are 2 sides, you know, to every bargain." "I'm sure he isn't anything to me," said Kate. "Why, he's not quite 17 years old yet." "Poor boy! What a shame to dispose of him so soon! We'll let him off for a year or 2, won't we, Miss Coverdale? But as there seems to be acknowledgment to be one beau with unappropriated services—" "I'm sure I have appropriated nobody," said Patty, "and didn't intend." "Godfrey, then, is the only knight whose services are claimed," said Miss Holmes, looking at Bessie. Bessie made no immediate answer with either her eyes or tongue, but when the Coverdales were gone she took her new friend to task. "How can you fill those young girls' heads with such nonsense?" Nature has done that, my dear. But nature should be trained, should it not? You will make them think that those foolish boys are in love with them. The foolish boys, as you call them, will look after that themselves. It seems to me that the foolish boys know what they are about better than some of their elders. And then, after a moment's pause, she added, As for my brother, I have no patience with him. Pray do not discuss your brother, said Bessie. And Bella, unless you wish to drive me away, pray do not speak of him and me together, as you did just now. Are you so bad as that the slightest commonplace joke upsets you? Would not his services be due to you as a matter of course? If you are so sore about it, you will betray your own secret. I have no secret, none at least from you or from mamma, and indeed none from him. We were both very foolish, thinking that we knew each other and our own hearts when we knew neither. I hate to hear people talk of knowing their hearts. My idea is that if you like a young man and he asks you to marry him, you ought to have him. That is, if there is enough to live on. I don't know what more is wanted. But girls are getting to talk and think as though they were to send their hearts through some fiery furnace of trial before they may give them up to a husband's keeping. I am not at all sure that the French fashion is not the best, and that these things shouldn't be managed by the fathers and mothers, or perhaps by the family lawyers. Girls who are so intent upon knowing their own hearts generally end by knowing nobody's heart but their own, and then they die old maids. Better than give themselves to the keeping of those they don't know and cannot esteem. That's a matter of taste. I mean to take the first that comes, so long as he looks like a gentleman and has not less than 800 a year. Now, Godfrey does look like a gentleman and has double that. If I had such a chance, I wouldn't think twice about it. But I have no such chance. That's the way the wind blows, is it? No, no. Oh, Bella, pray, pray leave me alone. Pray do not interfere. There is no wind blowing in any way. All that I want is your silence and your sympathy. Very well, I will be silent and sympathetic as the grave. Only don't imagine that I am cold as the grave also. I don't exactly appreciate your ideas, but if I can do no good, I will at any rate endeavor to do no harm. After lunch at about 3, they started on their walk, and managed to ferry themselves over the river. Oh, do let me, Bessie, said Kate Coverdale. I understand all about it. Look here, Miss Holmes, you pull the chain through your hands. And inevitably tear your gloves to pieces, said Miss Holmes. Kate certainly had done so, and did not seem to be particularly well pleased with the accident. There's a nasty nail in the chain, she said. I wonder those stupid boys did not tell us. Of course, they reached the trysting place much too soon, and were very tired of walking up and down to keep their feet warm, before the sportsmen came up. But this was their own fault, seeing that they had reached the stile half an hour before the time fixed. I never will go anywhere to meet gentlemen again, said Miss Holmes. It is most preposterous that ladies should be left in the snow for an hour. Well, young men, what sport have you had? I shot the big black cock, said Harry. Did you, indeed? Said Kate Coverdale. And here are the feathers out of his tail for you. He dropped them in the water, and I had to go in after them up to my middle. But I told you that I would, so I was determined to get them. Oh, you silly, silly boy, said Kate, but I'll keep them forever. I will indeed. This was said a little apart, for Harry had managed to draw the young lady aside before he presented the feathers. Frank also had his trophies for Paddy, and the tale to tell of his own prowess. In that he was a year older than his brother, he was by a year's growth less ready to tender his present to his lady-love openly in the presence of them all. But he found his opportunity, and then he and Paddy went on a little in advance. Kate also was deep in her consolations to Harry for his ducking, and therefore the four disposed of themselves in the manner previously suggested by Miss Holmes. Miss Holmes, therefore, and her brother and Bessie Garrow were left together in the path, and discussed the performances of the day in a manner that elicited no very ecstatic interest. So they walked for a mile, and by degrees the conversation between them dwindled down almost to nothing. "There is nothing I dislike so much as coming out with people younger than myself," said Miss Holmes. "One always feels so old and dull. Listen to those children there. They make me feel as though I were an old maiden aunt brought out with them to do propriety. Patty won't at all approve if she hears you call her a child. Nor shall I approve if she treats me like an old woman." And then she stepped on and joined the children. "I wouldn't spoil even their sport if I could help it," she said to herself, "but with them I shall only be a temporary nuisance. If I remain behind I shall become a permanent evil." And thus Bessie and her old lover were left by themselves. "I hope you will get on well with Bella," said Godfrey, when they had remained silent for a minute or two. "Oh, yes, she is so good-natured and light-spirited that everybody must like her. She has been used to so much amusement and active life that I know she must find it very dull here." "She is never dull anywhere, even at Liverpool, which for a young lady I sometimes think the dullest place on earth. I know it is for a man." "A man who has work to do can never be dull, can he?" "Indeed he can, as dull as death. I am so, often enough. I have never been very bright there, Bessie, since you left us." There was nothing in his calling her Bessie, for it had become habit with him since they were children, and they had formerly agreed that everything between them should be as it had been before that foolish whisper of love had been spoken and received. Indeed, provision had been made by them especially on this point, so that there need be no awkwardness in this mode of addressing each other. Such provision had seemed to be very prudent, but it hardly had the desired effect on the present occasion. "I hardly know what you mean by brightness," she said, after a pause. "Perhaps it is not intended that people's lives should be what you call bright." "Life ought to be as bright as we can make it." "It all depends on the meaning of the word. I suppose we are not very bright here at Thwaite Hall, but yet we think ourselves very happy." "I am sure you are," said Godfrey. "I very often think of you here." "We always think of places where we have been when we were young," said Bessie. And then again they walked on for some way in silence, and Bessie began to increase her pace with the view of catching the children. The present walk to her was anything but bright, and she bethought herself with dismay that there were still 2 miles before she reached the ferry. "Bessie," Godfrey said at last, and then he stopped as though he were doubtful how to proceed. She, however, did not say a word, but walked on quickly, as though her only hope was in catching the party before her. But they also were walking quickly, for Bella was determined that she would not be caught. "Bessie, I must speak to you once of what passed between us at Liverpool." "Must you?" said she. "Unless you positively forbid it." "Stop, Godfrey," she said. And they did stop in the path, for now she no longer thought of putting an end to her embarrassment by overtaking her companions. "If any such words are necessary for your comfort, it would hardly become me to forbid them. Were I to speak so harshly, you would accuse me afterwards in your own heart. It must be for you to judge whether it is well to reopen a wound that is nearly healed. But with me it is not nearly healed. The wound is open, always." "There are some hurts," she said, "which do not admit of an absolute and perfect cure, unless after long years." As she said so, she could not but think how much better was his chance of such perfect cure than her own. With her, so she said to herself, such curing was all but impossible, whereas with him it was as impossible that the injury should last. "Bessie," he said, and he again stopped her on the narrow path, standing immediately before her on the way. "You remember all the circumstances that made us part?" "Yes, I think I remember them." "And you still think that we were right to part?" She paused for a moment before she answered him, but it was only for a moment, and then she spoke quite firmly. "Yes, Godfrey, I do. I have thought about it much since then. I have thought, I fear, to no good purpose about aught else, but I have never thought that we had been unwise in that. And yet I think you loved me. I am bound to confess I did so, as otherwise I must confess myself a liar. I told you at the time that I loved you, and I told you so truly. But it is better, 10 times better, that those who love should part, even though they still should love, than that two should be joined together, who are incapable of making each other happy. Remember what you told me." "Oh, I do remember." "You found yourself unhappy in your engagement, and you said it was my fault." "Bessie, there is my hand. If you have ceased to love me, there is an end of it. But if you love me still, let all that be forgotten." "Forgotten, Godfrey? How can it be forgotten? You were unhappy, and it was my fault. My fault, as it would be if I tried to solace a sick child with arithmetic, or feed a dog with grass. I had no right to love you, knowing you as I did, and knowing also that my ways would not be your ways. My punishment I understand, and it is not more than I can bear. But I had hoped that your punishment would have been soon over." "You are too proud, Bessie." "That is very likely. Frank says that I am a Puritan, and pride was the worst of their sins." "Too proud and unbending. In marriage, should not the man and woman adapt themselves to each other?" "When they are married, yes. And every girl who thinks of marrying should know that in very much she must adapt herself to her husband. But I do not think that a woman should be the ivy to take the direction of every branch of the tree to which she clings. If she does so, what can be her own character? But we must go on, or we shall be too late." "And you will give me no other answer?" "None other, Godfrey. Have you not just now, at this very moment, told me that I was too proud? Can it be possible that you should wish to tie yourself for life to female pride? And if you tell me that now, at such a moment as this, what would you tell me in the close intimacy of married life, when the trifles of every day would have worn away the courtesies of guest and lover?" There was a sharpness of rebuke in this which Godfrey Holmes could not at the moment overcome. Nevertheless, he knew the girl and understood the workings of her heart and mind. Now, in her present state, she could be unbending, proud, and almost rough. In that she had much to lose in declining the renewed offer which he made her, she would, as it were, continually prompt herself to be harsh and inflexible. Had he been poor, had she not loved him, had not all good things seemed to have attended the promise of such a marriage, she would have been less suspicious of herself in receiving the offer, and more gracious in replying to it. Had he lost all his money before he came back to her, she would have taken him at once. Or had he been deprived of an eye, or become crippled in his legs, she would have done so. But circumstanced as he was, she had no motive to tenderness. There was an organic defect in her character, which no doubt was plainly marked by its own bump in her cranium, the bump of philo-martyrdom, it might properly be called. She had shipwrecked her own happiness in rejecting Godfrey Holmes. But it seemed to her to be the proper thing that a well-behaved young lady should shipwreck her own happiness. For the last month or two she had been tossed about by the waters, and was nearly drowned. Now there was beautiful land again close to her, and a strong, pleasant hand stretched out to save her. But though she had suffered terribly among the waves, she still thought it wrong to be saved. It would be so pleasant to take that hand, so sweet, so joyous, that it surely must be wrong. That was her doctrine, and Godfrey Holmes, though he hardly analyzed the matter, partly understood that it was so. And yet, if once she were landed on that green island, she would be so happy. She spoke with scorn of a woman clinging to a tree like ivy, and yet, were she once married, no woman would cling to her husband with sweeter feminine tenacity than Bessie Garrow. He spoke no further word to her as he walked home, but in handing her down to the ferry-boat he pressed her hand. For a second it seemed as though she had returned this pressure. If so, the action was involuntary, and her hand instantly resumed its stiffness to his touch. It was late that night when Major Garrow went to his bedroom, but his wife was still up, waiting for him. "Well," said she, "what has he said to you? He has been with you above an hour." Such stories are not very quickly told, and in this case it was necessary to understand him very accurately. At length I think I do understand him. It is not necessary to repeat at length all that was said on that night between Major and Mrs. Garrow as to the offer which had now for a third time been made to their daughter. On that evening, after the ladies had gone, and when the two boys had taken themselves off, Godfrey Holmes told his tale to his host, and had honestly explained to him what he believed to be the state of his daughter's feelings. "Now you know all," said he. "I do believe that she loves me, and if she does, perhaps she may still listen to you." Major Garrow did not feel sure that he knew it all, but when he had fully discussed the matter that night with his wife, then he thought that perhaps he had arrived at that knowledge. On the following morning Bessie learned from the maid, at an early hour, that Godfrey Holmes had left Thwaite Hall and gone back to Liverpool. To the girl she said nothing on the subject, but she felt obligated to say a word or two to Bella. "It is his coming that I regret," she said, "that he should have had the trouble and annoyance for nothing. I acknowledge that it was my fault, and I am very sorry." "It cannot be helped," said Miss Holmes, somewhat gravely. "As to his misfortunes, I presume that his journeys between here and Liverpool are not the worst of them." After breakfast on that day, Bessie was summoned into her father's book-room, and found him there, and her mother also. "Bessie," said he, "sit down, my dear. You know why Godfrey has left us this morning?" Bessie walked round the room, so that in sitting she might be close to her mother, and take her mother's hand in her own. "I suppose I do, papa," she said. "He was with me late last night, Bessie, and when he told me what had passed between you, I agreed with him that he had better go." "It was better that he should go, papa." "But he has left a message for you." "A message, papa?" "Yes, Bessie, and your mother agrees with me that it had better be given to you. It is this, that if you will send him word to come again, he will be here by Twelfth Night. He came before on my invitation, but if he returns, it must be on yours." "Oh, papa, I cannot." "I do not say that you can, but think of it calmly before you altogether refuse. You shall give me your answer on New Year's morning." "Mamma knows that it would be impossible," said Bessie. "Not impossible, dearest. In such a matter you should do what you believe to be right," said her father. "If I were to ask him here again, it would be telling him that I would—" "Exactly, Bessie. It would be telling him that you would be his wife. He would understand it so, and so would your mother and I. It must be so understood altogether." "But, papa, when we were at Liverpool—" "I have told him everything, dearest," said Mrs. Garrow. "I think I understand the whole," said the Major, "and in such a matter as this I will not give you counsel on either side. But you must remember that in making up your mind you must think of him as well as of yourself. If you do not love him, if you feel that as his wife you should not love him, there is not another word to be said. I need not explain to my daughter that under such circumstances she would be wrong to encourage the visits of a suitor. But your mother says you do love him." "Oh, mamma!" "I will not ask you. But if you do, if you have so told him and allowed him to build up an idea of his life happiness on such telling, you will, I think, sin greatly against him by allowing a false feminine pride to mar his happiness. When once a girl has confessed to a man that she loves him, the confession and the love together put upon her the burden of a duty towards him which she cannot with impunity throw aside." Then he kissed her, and bidding her give him a reply on the morning of the New Year, left her with her mother. She had 4 days for consideration, and they went past her by no means easily. Could she have been alone with her mother, the struggle would not have been so painful. But there was the necessity that she should talk to Isabella Holmes, and the necessity also that she should not neglect the Coverdales. Nothing could have been kinder than Bella. She did not speak on the subject till the morning of the last day, and then only in a very few words. "Bessie," she said, "as you are great, be merciful." "But I'm not great, and it would not be mercy." "As to that," said Bella, "he has surely a right to his own opinion." On that evening she was sitting alone in her room when her mother came to her, and her eyes were red with weeping. Pen and paper were before her, as though she were resolved to write, but hitherto no word had been written. "Well, Bessie," said her mother, sitting down close beside her, "is the deed done?" "What deed, mamma? Who says that I am to do it?" "The deed is not the writing, but the resolution to write. 5 words will be sufficient, if only those 5 words may be written." "It is for one's whole life, mamma, for his life as well as my own." "True, Bessie, that is quite true, but equally true whether you bid him come or allow him to remain away. That task of making up one's mind for life must at last be done in some special moment of that life." "Mamma, mamma, tell me what I should do." But this Mrs. Garrow would not do. "I will write the words for you if you like," she said, "but it is you who must resolve that they shall be written. I cannot bid my darling go away and leave me for another home. I can only say that in my heart I do believe that home would be a happy one." It was morning before the note was written, but when the morning came, Bessie had written it and brought it to her mother. "You must take it to papa," she said. Then she went and hid herself from all eyes till the noon had passed. "Dear Godfrey," the letter ran, "papa says that you will return on Wednesday if I write to ask you. Do come back to us, if you wish it. Yours always, Bessie." "It is as good as though she had filled the sheet," said the Major. But in sending it to Godfrey Holmes he did not omit a few accompanying remarks of his own. An answer came from Godfrey by return of post, and on the afternoon of the 6th of January Frank Garrow drove over to the station at Penrith to meet him. On their way back to Thwaite Hall there grew up a very close confidence between the 2 future brothers-in-law, and Frank explained with great perspicuity a little plan which he had arranged himself. "As soon as it is dark, so that she won't see it, Harry will hang it in the dining-room," he said, "and mind you go in there before you go anywhere else." "I am very glad you have come back, Godfrey," said the Major, meeting him in the hall. "God bless you, dear Godfrey," said Mrs. Garrow. "You will find Bessie in the dining-room," she whispered, but in so whispering she was quite unconscious of the mistletoe bough. And so also was Bessie, nor do I think that she was much more conscious when that introduction was over. Godfrey had made all manner of promises to Frank, but when the moment arrived he had found the moment too important for any special reference to the little bough above his head. Not so, however, Patty Coverdale. "It's a shame," said she, bursting out of the room, "and if I'd known what you had done, nothing on earth would have induced me to go in. I won't enter the room till I know that you've taken it out." Nevertheless, her sister Kate was bold enough to solve the mystery before the evening was over. End of The Mistletoe Bough by Anthony Trollope.